Hello again, everybody. Welcome. Hello, and welcome to this very special, spooky Halloween edition of Eugene Reviews. And to commemorate this dark, spooky, frightening holiday, we are going to look at the most disturbing, controversial horror film ever created. And it's none other than the 1973 classic, The Exorcist. 47 years after its initial release, The Exorcist still gets talked about to this day as one of the greatest horror films of all time and its most controversial. So now let's take a special, quick dive in to the development, execution, and response for this cult horror classic. So let's begin, shall we? The Exorcist is actually a horror novel developed by William Peter Blatty. It was based on a first encounter of an anonymous exorcism in 1949 of an anonymous boy. And after viewing The French Connection, William Peter Blatty was convinced that the director of his adapted work should be William Friedkin. Warner Brothers Studios, who would be developing this picture, insisted on putting major stars into this film. However, much to their chagrin, Friedkin and Blatty insisted on putting unknown actors into these roles. Thus came in Max von Sydow, thus came in Ellen Bernstein, thus came Jason Miller, and thus came in young 12-year-old innocent Linda Blair, who will go on to be casted in the role of the most controversial horror figure in film. Regan, of course, is possessed by a devil and is needed of an exorcism by two priests. The director and producer, as well as the studio, were still skeptical about headlining a 12-year-old girl to be carrying the weight of such a heavy film. And being only 12 years old, it also presented a challenge. How would she be able to deliver on such a role that demanded such vulgarity, that demanded such physical aspects and controversial imageries, and not to mention the stories that were told during the filming on set, sets being burned down, Ellen Bernstein getting injured, and various other stories that were reportedly told throughout the years. And as the film had no heavy box office star and was over budgeted, the studio had no high expectations for this film to deliver. However, when December 26, 1973 rolled around, the entire world would turn on its head. If there was a checkbox for horror films, The Exorcist would check every single box. It was frightening, it was disturbing, it was unsettling, it was nerve-wracking. The imagery displayed, the vulgarity said, the practical effects showcased, from the vomit to the floating body, anything and everything about this film was frightening in itself. And the star that stole everybody's heart was none other than young 12-year-old Linda Blair. An innocent girl on set transformed herself to become one of the most startling, disturbing, and frightening characters in the history of cinema. So much so it earned her an Academy Award nomination that year for Best Supporting Actress. The controversial imagery, even displaying the likes of Catholicism, was that much more unsettling. The tainted image of the Virgin Mary statue, the masturbation scene with the cross that included Regan, and not to mention the controversial medical procedure that was 100% accurate frame by frame. You can go through every single scene in this film and you will find something that was groundbreaking, something that was controversial, something that was scary. Something still to this day, after 40 plus years, it still gives you goosebumps just thinking about it. While the film may have dragged a couple of more minutes longer than it should have, it still doesn't diminish the fact that this film was still a nerve-wracking, unsettling viewing of pure horror, shocker, thriller, and suspense. And just wait till you see how the entire world responded to the release of The Exorcist. As it was originally reported in 1973 on Newsweek. On December 26, The Exorcist released, and since then, all hell broke loose. Many organizations and many assemblies decided and tried to get this film banned from release. Because of the unsettling images and controversial imagery of the Catholic Church, many did not want this film to be shown. They even went so far as to try and deliver the first ever MPAA rating of rated X. Ultimately, the film ended up with an R rating as it did not contain any scenes of nudity and for other various reasons. There was a ban to suppress the home video release of The Exorcist in the 80s, and that ban was lifted in 1999, 26 years after the film's initial release. And the audience response during the theatrical run of this film was strong, both in a good and a bad way. Good in a sense that many flocked the lines, lining up outside even in the cold dead of winter. With freezing sub-zero temperatures and snow outside, people still went to the theater the day after Christmas to watch this film. Bad in a sense, as people left and right, top to bottom, had some type of episode during this viewing. There were various reports of people fainting, people leaving the theaters in grotesque, people vomiting to a point that they had to supply barf bags to the moviegoers during their viewing of The Exorcist. There was even at least one report of a reported miscarriage by a filmgoer watching The Exorcist. And with that response generated a lot of attention, a lot of eyes, and a lot of cash. For 44 glorious, unholy years, The Exorcist maintained its status as the highest grossing R-rated horror film of all time, until it was knocked off by 2017's remake of Stephen King's It. But it also maintains its status as the only horror film to ever be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. While it did not walk away with that prestigious award, it did walk away with 2 other Academy Award wins, for Best Sound and for Best Adapted Screenplay. And after 40 plus years of release, it still has a status and a position to date as one of the top horror films, one of the most controversial films, one of the best films ever developed. Insofar as it was selected for film preservation, from the 360 head spins to the sub-zero chilling temperature in the room, to the shaking of the bed, to the floating of the body, to the projectile vomit, and the grotesque blood, The Exorcist surely did make its impact not only in film, but in pop culture in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even today. Now let me take a second and drop my shtick as I give my verdict for The Exorcist. So, enough with that shtick. My impression of The Exorcist still maintains after initially watching this maybe a couple of years ago. I'm still kind of disturbed and irked and, unsettled watching this film for, multiple times. It is truly groundbreaking, just the effects used, both practical and CGI, to convey such a supernatural thrill and aura that wasn't ever seen in film prior to it, and now is kind of emulated in a bunch of other horror films to date. You gotta hand it to a 12-year-old Linda Blair for giving such a remarkable performance at her age. It's almost taboo to think that, she would have to carry that much weight on her shoulder, but she did it, and it's classical. Every shot that was horrifying really did deliver and still leaves a lasting impression that's both frightening and just mesmerizing to this day, even after 40 plus years of being a part of this world. Yes, it did drag on a little bit more than I anticipated, but I think overall the impression that it left was, noteworthy. It was controversial, but it was also it was groundbreaking, it was great, it was elusive, and I think it checks off all the boxes when it comes to being a horror film. So, performances delivered, the effects delivered, the story was, enticing and something to make you feel uncomfortable. And I think that The Exorcist is something that we can reflect on, generation after generation as still being something that questions us, is something that, really leaves us feeling, uneasy at the end, and shows what power that it possesses. After the last frame of the film. I'm gonna give The Exorcist a strong, spooky, frightening 8.8 out of 10. All right, let's go back to my dark side. And thus concludes this special edition of Eugene Reviews, this Halloween edition of Eugene Reviews. What other tidbits would you like to share about this controversial film? Any and all comments, leave them in the comments section below. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and follow my channel and follow my Instagram channel at Eugene Reviews. You also see my top 5 spooky recommendations for the month of October. Until then, I hope you, your friends, your family, your loved ones have a safe, fun, and spooky Halloween evening. This is Eugene signing off for another episode of Eugene Reviews. I will see you next week. And that is a wrap.
Soy Isabel, guardián de la primera puerta. ¿Quién más?